Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney. And on today's show, we're going to look at how you can set up a back channel to remote guests. So a producer will be able to talk to remote guests during a production, whether they're on air or off air, but make sure that none of that conversation ever makes it out on air. And we're going to do all that in vMix with shortcuts and a little bit of scripting. But before we get to that, I'd like to first thank all of you for coming here. If you have any questions, any comments, just post them below, and we'll try to get to everything here on the show. Also, if you'd like to join me live on air, we do have a call-in link that you can click on. It should also be in the show notes for the show, and that will get you on here, air with me, and we can have a conversation about all of this. Okay, so let's get started. what I was really looking to do was to find a back channel communications way. Some of that could be like an IFB, some of it could be you want video in the conversation, other things like that. Uh, but I wanted to find a way I could implement in vMix that would work no matter what remote guest solution you're using, whether you're bringing somebody in from any one of the channels in vMix for a call or for Zoom, whether you're using LiveToAirZ, whether you're using LiveToAir, however you're doing it, I wanted to get something that would work well for that. And then at the end, I want to show you, if you are using LiveToAir, an interesting thing you can do by allowing your producer and your remote talent to both be remote and how to control all that remotely. So before I get in, let me just see if we have any comments here. So, Wolfgang, always great to see you. But wonderful to have you here for whatever part of the show you can watch. Thank you very much. So, okay, so let's dive in. And where I want to start is to talk a bit of the basics of how vMix handles audio and the different elements that go into this. So if I switch over to the vMix interface here, what you can see is there's a whole mixer section that's inside of vMix. And so the way this is set up is that you have what are called audio buses. An audio bus allows you to take multiple sources of audio and route them into a single destination point. And that's an audio bus. There's the master bus, and that's what normally would just be streamed out to an audience or recorded when you're actually doing a video recording. But vMix gives you other buses that you can use for a variety of other things. And we will be using these buses here today. But the way it works is that all the sources that contain audio or can contain audio are showing up on the inputs in the mixer. And below each one of these inputs, I have the ability to say, which bus do I want, or which buses do I want to route this audio to? And the advantage here is that if I route multiple things to, say, master, I can control their overall level using just one slider, but I can control their relative levels by adjusting the sliders here in the mixer for each one of the sources being routed to that bus. So it gives you this sort of two-step way of managing levels. One is individual by source, and the other is in aggregate by a group of sources that are going to a single destination. So that's really the overall model that vMix uses for this. And you can see that vMix has a whole range of buses that are available. So they have the master bus and then A to G as a whole set of buses. For this, we've just enabled A, B, C, and G in addition to master for the things we want to do. So what we are going to do, if you think about how you want to handle a setup where you're routing audio for when guests go on air and off air, we're going to make sure that when the guest is off air, they do not have their audio routed out to master, because that's what we'll be streaming. And when they're off air, nothing they say should go there. And we also want to make sure that if we have any other participant that maybe like a producer that may be talking to that remote guest, we want to make sure their audio is not routed to master. So we would start out by, if we look here, let's just sort of dive into the vMix preset side of this. What I have here for this production is I have a host, and that host can bring on a guest. This could be something like a caller if you wanted to do something, or it could be just a guest that you have for a individual show. And then I also have a producer that's going to be handling all the guests while the host is sort of the on-air talent. And what I've done is I've taken and said, create an input, which is just whatever's in the vMix output over here. And then I've made composited returns. In this return, this is what's going to go back to the guest. And there's a couple of elements to that we use for the guest. And I have what's going back to the producer. And you can just see from here, the producer just sort of at a fixed basis sees whatever the output is up here, and it sees whatever the guest is here. So they always can see the guest, whether they're on screen or not, because their job is to sort of watch and make sure everything looks good with these remote guests. So after that, I have the audio that's coming out of bus B, and I'm routing that. I'm routing this to another bus, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But that's what this input is. It's taking the audio from bus B and routing that back in as an input. And then this is my return that I have over here for what goes back to my remote guest. And I set this up in a mix, even though I have sort of my main return set up over here for this is what I want the guest to see, which is what we have up here. What the mix lets me do is if I wanted to at some point throw something else in to show the guest, I could actually switch that, and it just makes it simpler. So as a general setup guide, I would probably recommend for all your returns, set them up as an individual mix, and then you have the ability to throw different things back to that remote guest if you need them without having to rearrange anything in the configuration of your remote setup. So after that, I have a few other elements, things to indicate whether the guest is on air or off, or other stuff we'll get into in the show. But it's a pretty simple setup. I basically have a host, a guest, and a producer that are all coming in, and the producer and the remote guest both have individual returns that go back to them. So that's how we're setting this up. So let's start with the on-air and off-air piece. And to do that, I'll just show you, if you sort of look here, when I go on air and off air, what I'm doing is I am, for this remote guest, so this is the remote guest feed, they see a little red border and a clear on-air message. And when I switch them off air, they see a green border and a little green off-air message in the upper corner. You'll also notice now, since I'm off air, the guest over here, if you look at the mixer, the guest is not routed anywhere. And so what do we want to happen when the guest is routed on air? Well, there's two things. First, we want their audio to go to master. So that's the first thing. And we're using the master bus as, the main live stream or recording that we'll do for this. So we want their audio to go out to master. The other thing, though, is the operator here, they have a headset. We want to be able to make sure that that remote guest audio is going to their headset. So in this case, and I'll explain this as we dive into the next section, which we'll dig a little more into the buses. In this case, I am mapping bus C to the audio headset of the host. So the two things I want to have happen when I go on air is that the guest audio goes to master and it goes to C, which is the host headset. So when I go on air, you can see that in addition to putting the on-air logo up above and making sure the guest is aware they're on air, it is also routing their audio correctly. And this is being done through a very simple set of scripts, which are basically just almost like macros with multiple function calls. So let me actually jump to the script that's doing this on air and off air, and it should be pretty clear exactly what we're doing for this. So this is the simple script that we have for on air. And our on air script, we set up a set of things here that will just give you the names of the inputs. So the guest input is called guest, the producer input is called producer, the return scene, which is what we're sending back to the remote guest, is called guest return. And because we are putting a potentially a picture-in-picture, which we'll talk about later for the push-to-talk part of this, we just put the layer in that we have for that. But we're doing this very simply. When we're off air, what we're doing is we are going in, we're using these two calls, which are basically shortcuts that say audio bus off, and the input is guest. So we're taking what that guest input, and we're turning around and say, turn off the master route and turn off the operator headset, the C bus. And we're doing that. We are also, and this is sort of my abundance of caution, we are also just turning off the guest own audio from routing back to them. So that's just one extra step I put in here to make sure that they don't hear themselves echo in a return. So just by being off air, that sort of level sets that. Then what we are doing is we are basically making sure that we turn off the producer layers. So if they had their video up or anything like that, we're turning all this stuff off. And we are basically just making sure that the bus B volume, which is the volume of the audio, the mix minus audio coming from the studio. So it will be the host and any other sources, but not the guest. That's what's coming back through bus B. We're making sure that that's at full volume because now the guest is off air and they just want to hear whatever is going on. So very simple. And it's a few future things that we have in here. So don't get confused. But this is the real heart of it. We are basically going in and we are just turning off the bus master and bus operator headset that the guest audio is being routed to. And let me switch over to the go to on air. Very, very similar, the same setups in advance. We're making sure that the audio level from the show is set to 100 again, just sort of belts and suspenders stuff, making sure that's always initialized where it should be. And then we're going here and we're turning on, we're making sure the guest audio is on in case it was muted by the operator or something. And then we're just going into those two buses, and instead of audio bus off, we're doing audio bus on. And that is just turning those buses on. And then everything else we'll sort of get to later. But again, that's the core of what we're doing for the go on air and go off air. And as you can see, it's just on its own, it's a pretty handy way to handle this because the guest is getting a clear indicator in their return video. So if we just sort of jump back to the vMix side of things, in their return video, they're seeing a clear indicator of their state. And in one button push, all of the routing is now handled correctly and sort of initialized. So a very simple thing, but that's sort of the first piece. We wanted to give you an on-air and off-air model, which is similar to what we have with on-air and off-air in LiveToAir, but we wanted to do this generally. Now, before I get to the push-to-talk elements, which is the real more interesting piece of all of this, we do have a few more comments. So just want to make sure I say hi to everybody. Oh, Fritz Roman, thank you for joining, Fritz. Always good to hear from you. So, Jacek, thank you for joining from Poland. I appreciate you making time on a Friday night. Jeff, how are you? Oh, good to see you, Jeff. Thank you for joining us here. Okay, so let's go to the next piece. So what we want to be able to have is we wanted to give the producer the ability now to talk to this remote because we have this on air and off air. We don't really care specifically whether the guest is on air or off air, but what we want to make sure is that regardless of their state, when the producer talks to the guest, that only goes to the guest and it doesn't go on air. That's the first thing. And we also want to make sure that when we are, as a producer, if we are talking to that guest, that the audio level of the show gets lowered, but the level of the audio from the producer stays high. So the producer's voice is very clear, but the show is still playing in the background. They can sort of hear that. And you can set it sort of to whatever level you want. So they can still hear if something's going on, but the producer becomes the dominant voice in their headset when they're listening remotely. So that's basically what we're going to cover with the push to talk. The other piece, though, is we are also injecting in a corner of the return video, a video of the producer. So it makes it very clear that the producer is talking to you, but you could still, look at your screen and sort of see, what's going on in the studio. So to get to that, we're going to have to dig a little bit deeper into how audio buses in vMix work. And I'm going to jump up to settings here, and we'll look at the section over here called audio outputs. So there's a couple of things that you can set up here. So the first is, what's my master output? What is it that's going to play this? And what is my headphone output, which will give me, exactly, what I want to be able to have if I have headsets hooked up to vMix. We're not really using those because the host is probably not directly connected to the headsets in vMix. It's probably a production operator that's using those. So we're just going to route their audio out to a separate device. But down below this, we have the buses that are available inside of vMix. And you have the ability, when you have a bus, you can just enable it. And that means I want to use this internally. So I'm going to sort of take and use the bus just as a level control all within the vMix universe. So I may be feeding it out into an output as one of my, audio outs or any of that. But it's not something that I'm necessarily marrying to a device. But if you want to marry it to a device, you can. And so for bus B, I just, which is what we're using for the audio of everything that's going on our show. So that's the mix minus that I want to send back to the guest from the show. I'm using a virtual audio cable for that. And so what I've done is saying anything that I route to bus B will be now coming in as a virtual out through a virtual audio cable. And if you remember, when I went through the preset, I have that bus B audio coming back into vMix. And the reason I'm doing that is because if you'll notice, I'll sort of slide this out of the way as we go through. When I have audio buses inside of vMix, the only bus I can route them to natively is the master bus. I can turn it on and say, go to master or not. I don't have the ability to route them to any other buses. But if you remember what I said I want to do, I want to be able, when you're doing push to talk, to lower the volume of all the audio coming from the studio back to the guest, that mix minus, the studio mix minus for the guest, but not affect the audio of a producer talking to that guest. And so the way I'm doing that is I am taking and using a virtual audio cable, bringing that in to vMix as an input. And then what I will do with that audio bus B is I am routing that to bus G. And so this is one of those things where I'm just using a bus internally. So what I'm going to do is if I want the producer to talk to this remote guest, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the producer audio also to bus G. So I'm going to route that. So now this is all the studio audio will be coming into bus G, and the producer audio will be coming into bus G. But the difference is that I can have this at one volume level and this at another volume level, and I can separate them. I wouldn't be able to do that if I were just routing all of the audio sources that were coming in from the studio into bus G. And the reason is when the producer talks, that audio, if I adjusted those audio levels from the studio individually, that's affecting the master output that's going out. So that would be something that I couldn't really do. So there's no way to make adjustments globally to all of those studio originated mix minus audio sources that I want to send back. So this lets me do that. And so I am basically sending out this cable and putting it into bus G, which I've enabled here. And for bus C, I said that's just the operator headset. This could be anything. It would probably be something that would be Dante that I'd be sending out that would go into a mixer and can go to the uh, the host so they could hear everything that's going on. So this is basically how buses work. And we can go, I'll probably do another show more specifically the details behind how all of this works with different types of devices and Dante. But for now, that just gives you a sense of how the flow of audio works. And it's actually really, really flexible. The routes to buses and then the ability to manipulate buses as aggregate groups of inputs. So let's actually look now. I'm just going to do this with push to talk. And so we will take a look at this is what's being sent back to the remote guest. So if I do push to talk, I'll just sort of hold this down. You can now see that the operator, I'll clip it on so I can lock it on. So this is the operator now, that, or the producer rather, that is talking to the remote guest. You will see that over here, I've taken audio bus B and I've lowered the audio level. And so you can see I dropped that down. And then you can see over here that the producer audio is now being routed to bus G. And if I go and I turn that off, you'll see that all of these things have now changed. This audio level is back to full, and the producer is no longer routed to bus G, and the video now is switched off. So I have this just sort of simple button push for push to talk that will allow me to sort of do this on and off. And again, this is actually, for what we're doing here, this is even simpler shortcut wise than what we did for the on air off air. So if I switch over to the script code here, let's just look at for push to talk off. Again, we have the same basic stuff we set up, our producer input name and the guest return input name and the layer that that video pops up on. We're just doing 3 function calls. That's really it. We are turning the bus off in the beginning. And then, because this is off now, so we're doing off. So we make sure they're no longer going to bus G. We turn off their picture-in-picture. So we just have that on a layer. And so we turn and say, take whatever layer that's on in our return scene, which is the guest return, and shut that layer off. So we turn layer on and off. That's all we're doing. And we just set audio bus B level back to 100. And that's really just counter to what we have for turning it on, where we turn on the audio bus for G, we turn on the layer with the video of the producer, and we drop the volume of the bus B down to 55. And so that's that toggle, and the audio comes in. And very, very simple to do, but very, very powerful, mainly because now it's easy for a guest, especially if you're doing something like call-in or something like that. When that guest connects, you can have a producer talking to them, but everything is queued up and ready to go. So it's a very, very quick transition. The producer can talk to them. You can then, switch them on air, and the producer can then just go off, even if they're on air, and nudge them or talk to them, because maybe they're not going to be visually on screen all the time while they're on air, but the producer may want to do things to talk to them. And that is why in the producer feed, they can see exactly what's going on air. So that was part of what we wanted to do. And I think, that is something that is really valuable, because now the producer has situational awareness and the guest always knows what's going on and has that sort of backstop. So they know there is somebody in the studio off camera helping them and coaching them, whether it's before or even during the actual interview or question asking or whatever that is going on. So that is the core of what I wanted to show, really focusing a lot on audio routing and how all of that works. But I also wanted to talk a little bit more about what you could do if you wanted your producer to also be remote. And this is one of the reasons, like when I set all this up, I knew LiveToAir could do a lot of this, but first I wanted to make sure that even if you're not using LiveToAir, this would still work for, whatever remote guest solution you're using. But I also wanted to set up the framework for this, because if you are using Live-to-Air, I now can leverage this in a fairly simple script, which encompasses what we just showed for the push to talk, uh, but have this all be controlled by a remote operator. And the way we can do that uh, is because inside Live-to-Air, we have the ability to do reactions, basically hand raise, agree, disagree. And so we bake that into LiveToAir, and that's metadata that is fed from a remote participant that's connected. So in this case, the producer. And what we decided to do was that if the producer raised their hand on the LiveToAir side, we would have a script that would detect that and then do all of the things we wanted to do with bringing that guest push to talk mode. So I'll just show here. If I slide this over here, this is the reactions that we have for Live-to-Air. So hand raise, agree, disagree. Very simple. But if I click here and I turn around and set my Live-to-Air hand raise from the producer, because of a script we have running, you can see now that this is all switched on and I'm now doing push to talk. And if we actually go back and look at the vMix interface, and you can see the mixes that I have here, if I click this off, now I am just clicking on the hand raise over here on the side. This is just basically allowing the remote producer to feed into the remote guest and talk to them and coach them. So you don't even have to have everybody in one location at one time. So let's actually dive into the script for that, because that's basically builds on everything we just covered here. So let me sort of go back to the top. So a few things as level set. The way Live-to-Air works is that all the metadata that it writes out, everything about, what guests are in what channels, what are they, what's their names, what's their state, all of those things are all written out as either XML or JSON. And we have all that data sitting here in this file, and this is the location. This can be set in Live-to-Air. This is where I'm just picking it up from here, running Live-to-Air here. And so all I'm doing is I'm going to open this XML file, read it as a document, and then I'm going to look at a specific node, which is basically interaction state. So anything that a guest interacts, I'm going to turn around and say, I want to make sure I am tracking the interaction state. And I'm just initializing and say, because really what I'm interested in is a transition in state. So if you were at one state and then you go to another state, that's the only time I want to activate push to talk. Otherwise, it's just if the hand is raised, every time I check, that hand's going to be raised and it's going to be sort of a lot of overhead where it just keeps resetting everything to be, basically push to talk. So we want to avoid that. So we're going to do a few things here. And basically, we set this up as a big loop, load the XML from this file, and then we start dissecting it. So the first thing we're doing is in the producer for this is in LiveToAir guest channel 5. So we set that up and say, so what I want to do is I want to get all the XML that's associated with guest channel 5. And that's what I'm doing here. This is just the X path I need for that, selecting it as a single node. But what I'm doing is I'm checking to make sure. So say LiveToAir wasn't up yet. It'll just sit there and go, there isn't anything. I can't read that. So it'll just come here and say, okay, just keep going back and keep looping and wait till it comes up and everything's set. Not a likely scenario, but that would be the first one that you'd want to have there. The next one is I'm just making sure that the remote producer is connected and online. So that'd be the next thing. So if they are online now and sort of connected to Live-to-Air, then I can keep going. But if not, if they're still not connected, they're just joined but haven't been added to a channel, we will just sleep and go back and sleep and go back. So these are sort of our two buffer stops. Make sure that LiveToAir is running and that they can access this, and then make sure that we have our producer sitting in channel 5 and online. Once we have that, we can know we can go forward. And so all we're going to do now is we're going to say for this node, which is for producer, let's grab the interaction state. So that's the name of the element inside the node. We're going to grab the text that's in there. And we're going to say that's my current interaction. That's what I have going on right now. And then what I'm going to look at is I'm going to say if the previous interaction I had was none, which is basically what it defaults to. There's no interaction yet. Nothing has happened. So it will normally say none. And the current interaction contains the word hand raise. Its hand raised is in there. So we're just looking for if it contains hand and we know it's up, then we have a transition. It went from there was nothing pressed to something was pressed. So then I just go and I do all the things I do when we have push to talk, which if you remember was turn the layer on with the producer video and route the producer audio to bus G and lower the studio volume. So we're just doing that. And the thing is that once I go through all this, if I go back again and I know that the previous interaction was the hand raise and the current interaction is hand raise, I don't do anything. I just ignore all of this code. So I'm not constantly hammering vMix with shortcuts, 4 or 5 times a second to do things that are already done. So this is just happening and just being executed on that transition from the none state to the hand raise state. And then I'm also looking and saying, if the previous interaction was the hand raise and the current interaction is none, which is, again, we're just pulling this right out of the XML that's sitting there, then I'm doing the opposite. I'm turning off the producer video layer. I'm turning off the audio bus, and I'm setting bus B volume, which is the audio, the mix minus audio coming from the studio for the remote guest. I'm putting that back to 100. And then I just go and say, set the previous interaction to the current interaction. That's how I sort of pass the baton to say, this is the last thing we did. And that's how I know only when transitions happen to execute stuff. And then I'm waiting, a quarter of a second to not saturate the CPU. And then I jump back and do it all again. So, it's very responsive. It gets everything done, but it works using remote producer, remote interaction. And so you could have a host in the studio and do all of the remote guest handling remotely, especially if it's LiveToAir, because we can bring people in through Call and Manager, which works remotely from everything. And we have all the metadata coming in LiveToAir to handle everything. So a lot of stuff could be done here. Okay, so that's everything I wanted to cover. So let me see if we have any more comments here. Reci, hopefully I am saying the company name correctly. Recri, probably it's Recri. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. So, okay, with this as a good wrap, why don't we jump over to our post show, and we can take any other questions you have, and I can talk a little bit more about sort of the general things that you can do more with audio in general here. So if you can't make the post show, I thank you all for making the time now. We will be doing another show in a few weeks. I'm not sure whether it's going to be a pre-recorded or a live. We have a lot going on right now at the business. So based on that, it could affect timing, but we will be doing another show shortly, and we will see you then. But if you can join us for the post show, I'll see you in a moment. Take care. Thank you. All right, welcome to the post show. One of the things I found is that audio is something that doesn't get a lot of love when people do shows about production. And I understand why it's not easy to demonstrate and to, you know, basically communicate well. I mean, the advantage here was that I was showing a lot of visual stuff and you could see how all the sliders were moving. So it gave you sort of reference for this. But audio in general is often neglected as a topic. So I just wanted to sort of highlight some of the stuff that you can do with audio here. And it wasn't so much that this is the absolute use case, though, clearly this could work very well for this use case. But there are a lot of things you can do with routing audio and creating different mixes dynamically. And the two key elements to this were, first, audio buses. So understanding that I can take audio that's coming from a source and route it to a bus and then manipulate that bus because I want to do things from there as, different inputs of audio that I want to route to different places. And you could see the buses can be just enabled and use like bus G, which is the audio that I'm returning back to my remote guest. But it could also be used to send audio to particular devices. So I could be creating a mix for an in-venue uh, uh, speaker system. And I could also be doing a mix that I want for my live stream. And I could have different things going to that. And that lets me get the relative value set on the individual inputs, but the overall level of the aggregate that I want to send to a destination set using the buses. And so that was sort of the first thing that was in there. The other thing, though, that I wanted to call out is like VB audio cable. If you don't have that, it's a must-have. So if you just look it up online for VB audio, it is so useful for so many different things. It effectively allows you to connect a source on your computer with another source on your computer. And it treats it as a cable that connects those two without having to route out and route in. So say I wanted to send audio from vMix into a return on LiveToAir, or I wanted to return directly to Zoom or to Teams. I could either do that as sort of an embedded NDI feed and take the NDI audio. But if I wanted to do something where maybe I'm going to feed this out, feed it into OBS to do something, and then feed OBS into Zoom, now I want to connect multiple hops. I have the ability to do that. It also lets me do things where, like I showed here, I want to take it in as treat it just as another audio device that I could pick up in any other element. So if I wanted to do something that didn't allow me to just sort of take NDI in, but I wanted to take that audio in, you could do that. And it is a general utility that is phenomenal. And it is downloadable for free, but it is a donationware site. So I would recommend that if you can give them something. I have no vig in this, so this is just me being impressed with what they've done and the fact that it is available. Definitely, they have virtual audio cable. They have a whole set of other mixer applications that are all outstanding. Little difficult to wrap your head around initially, but once you get their design, they are just phenomenal tools to leverage. So that was, the other thing to sort of take from this. But there is so much that can be done with audio where you're creating different mixes for different situations. And you may want to have much more control, but you really have just been using regular input levels for everything. Now this gives you another tool to work with. So I guess if we do not have any other questions, we can wrap this up, but I'll give you just a few moments. If there is anything, let's get it in now. But the other piece to all of this is I think working with remote guests is also sort of a critical piece of most productions. And I set this up with a single guest. You can do a lot of stuff with multiple guests. You do have enough buses to create different mixes for different guests, which is another thing to consider when you set these up. Uh, so you could, if you wanted your host to have a different audio mix than your guest, you could do that where you could have somebody always talking to the host, but that audio isn't coming in and going out to all the remote guests. So hopefully, use cases like that will start to pop into your head as you think of how you can put all this stuff together. But making sure also that none of this audio goes out on air is critical. So wrapping these things up into sort of pre-canned macros will just reduce the chance of error. And you can also, like you saw, because I did the on-air offer, you can do things on screen here that will make sure the operator knows exactly what the state of everything is. So the producer could clearly have something which shows where they're being routed. So I could have put little indicators to say your audio is live or your audio isn't. So anytime audio gets routed to a master, I could show that to the return video. So different things you can do for situational awareness, not just for guests, but for also your production crew. So really cool stuff. So we have one more, Bill Mew. Bill, thank you for joining us. No issues with being late. So glad you actually made it. And, enjoy the show. Feel free to reach out to me, through the, chat or message me if you have any questions. Thank you. All right, then. So I guess we're going to call that a wrap for this show. Thank you all for joining me. I really appreciate the responses, the interactivity, and love getting on with you live as often as I can. So thank you all for that. But until the next show, be well, take care. Oh, wait, I have one more. It says, Bill is asking, if you're using the Mix Zoom integration, can you use different buses for speakers waiting to come on with Zoom? Okay, so this is a bigger challenge, and a good question overall. Zoom does not have multi-channel, the ability to send individual channels to individual guests in a single meeting. The way you would probably want to handle that is if you have guests that are waiting to come on air, I would put them into a breakout room inside of Zoom. And that breakout room can have its own audio and video return. They will just hear each other in the breakout room and not hear what's going on in the main meeting. So you have the ability using breakout rooms to put people in there and stage them into the main meeting, or the other way around, have everybody in the main meeting be the people that are waiting, but have my live setup be in one of the breakout rooms, and you just move people in and out to handle that. And LiveToAirZ, which is our Zoom integration product, will allow you to have LiveToAirZ join a breakout room, and you can have it work that way, where you can actually be doing all your live streaming from that breakout room and be pulling guest video that way. We also have an experimental feature in an upcoming version that will allow you to launch multiple LiveToAirZ instances and sort of control them all on one machine, but with separate interfaces for each instance. But that would let you put different instances assigned to different breakout rooms and the main meeting room. And each of those could have their own audio and video community sort of conversation going on there. And that would give you the ability to do that. So that was a great question in just under the wire. I almost missed it, so I apologize for that, Bill. But thank you. That was really good. Okay, I just didn't want to jump the gun again. So thank you, everybody. I really appreciate you all joining. And until next time, be safe, be well. Take care.